Hello, welcome to another Houdini training session. My name is Gianvito Serra, and today we're going to be learning one of the most powerful and important features of Houdini called the digital assets. Okay, digital assets is really the thing that won me over, when I first was actually learning Houdini, and I was very excited to get to this part of a class just because I feel like it is one of the things that I feel has made this package very distinguishable, from many others in regards to actually providing a very modular methodology for creating assets. Okay, so I left myself some notes here to make sure that I cover that I miss on anything here, but. So what is a digital asset? It's a very interesting name, something that is unique to Houdini certainly. Now digital asset is basically a custom operator type, okay? So it's basically a node, just like any other node in Houdini, which is made out of other node networks. It can also be made out of, code. It could also be, but it could be made out of even a combination of nodes and code at the same time. You encapsulate the network that you create in a digital asset and then promote parameters of nodes inside the asset as parameters of handles of the asset itself. Okay, so the idea here is that after you build your network and you collapse a whole network into a single asset, you're able to pick parameters from your whole network and promote them to the top as the most, part controls for your particular node itself. Okay. The beautiful thing about it is that they let you capture the functionality of any network in a single modular little node. It could be a single node could be a full character. It could be a full compositing effect, like you could even reproduce a whole filter from Photoshop as a single node. You could maybe build a particle system, a whole lighting system, as a simple reusable tool that can be reused by any artist, on any project or at any time. Just in short, to explain a little bit what it is, it defines a new node type in Houdini using the network of node you created or code, if you like to also add any code in there. But it does require no coding to do. You could spend your whole life making very impressive digital assets without writing a single line of code. The nodes that you create can be reused, widely encapsulated, etc. It's very not typical to have digital assets within digital assets, which drives smaller functionality. And they can operate really on any kind of data. You can have nodes that operate on geometry, they can operate on images, on audio, all at the same time. You could have a node that handles all of that data at the same time if you wanted to. It doesn't matter. So they're very flexible, they're very powerful. And hope you find this very valuable. So that said, let me go ahead and minimize these guys. So you guys probably remember the node network that we had from the last project that we did, okay? The column generation network, okay? And as we look at it, we have quite a few nodes that we created to actually make this column happen here, okay? It's really cool, but as you can imagine, this will be a very daunting thing to give to somebody else to actually work with, because they will most likely have to actually step through the nodes to try to understand at least how this whole thing works. It is very possible too that the person who's using it may not be a Houdini expert, in which case it may be even more difficult for them to be able to get in here and pick up some of these nodes and be able to do something, okay? So likewise, if you were to actually take this into a new project, that could be a very daunting task as well. Of course, you can always select all these nodes, you can copy them and paste them somewhere else. But, that's a very impractical thing to do if you're having to make, say, for example, a Roman temple with hundreds of columns, okay? So, what is nice about digital assets is that you can basically grab this whole network that we see here and simply represent it with a single node. In this case, I call the column generator, okay? And just to show you, I'm going to make this my active node, and you will notice that there is really no difference between this node and the giant network that we have here. Yet this little node that we have right here contains the full functionality of the network that we just saw happen over there. We can control the height of our column. Okay. Oops. We can control the radius of a column. something that actually we weren't doing before too much. We can still control the rows for the, you can control the rows for the detail top to bottom, and we can even control the groups to make the art director happy. We even have a little slider to control the amount of taper that we have on the column. If we want it to be a little more stylized or we want it to be very rigid and straight, we can control all of that all within one interface. So you will notice that in order to do all of those changes before, I will have to go to every single one of these nodes, find the node that actually had all of those parameters, and control every single one of those parameters, you know, as I wanted, right? So it's a little bit of node fishing that you want to have to do. In this particular case, we don't have to because we have it all encapsulated in a single node network, okay? So it's a wonderful like that. Now, the secret behind this though is that if we look in here and we double click on this node, you will notice that inside of it, we have all the nodes that we have outside, okay? But they're encapsulated in such a way where you don't have to ever recreate this whole node network every time, okay? These digital assets give you access to the nodes, but only if you really need to. You know, if you wanted to just grab all these columns as is, and be able to have a bunch of variations of them all in one scene and not have to worry about the subnet, all that you have to do is Control C and Control V as many of these guys as we want, and transform them away. You know, so that we can have so that we can have multiple of these guys laying on the scene if we wanted to, okay? And then ultimately we can just merge them here. Okay. And so on and so forth. And then each one of these guys can have completely different values if we wanted to. So for example, we can make one a little bit less tall. Okay. We can make one a little bit, change the radius on one of them. And all of a sudden, without having to reproduce the whole network or having to copy and paste it, we have 3 different columns altogether. Okay. So that's the beauty of what we can do here, and we can do with digital assets. Very cool. So let's figure out. I'm gonna go ahead in this lesson and go over how do we go about doing this with this particular network that we created before. Okay. Some of you noticed probably there was a little bit of a dark shadow down here. That's something actually that I need to, that just looking at it I notice that I have to fix, but it's no big deal. It's something that we can fix quite quickly. Awesome. So, to create a digital asset, all that we have to do, it's a very simple process, is go to the network that, and I'll make this bigger so we can see a little bit, go to our network that has all the nodes which do our function, okay? In this case, our nice little column generator that we have here. And then select all your nodes, okay, and we put them in a subnet, which is, you can use this little button to do so, okay? So this collapses all your nodes in a little subnet, okay? But now this is just a subnet, it's not a digital asset. We can go inside and all the nodes are still fully explicit, okay? So copying a subnet is just like copying a bunch of nodes, you know? If you change something on one, you know, you're not gonna be able to actually encapsulate that functionality. In fact, if you look at the parameter window, I will look at it again, we don't really have any parameters either other than if we wanted to actually name this level something, okay? So not too useful for us. To turn this subnet into a digital asset, what we need to do is to simply click on it, right click on this, and then go to create digital asset. Okay, so it's right past the middle, close to the bottom, okay? Okay, so the moment that we do this, we're going to get a neat little dialog asking us about some questions about the digital asset that we're about to create, okay? So the first one they want to know is an operator label, okay? The label is the little name that appears here, is the pretty name that people are gonna read. You can have spaces, you can have whatever you want on it, okay? It's an artist name, if you will. The one on the bottom, the operator name, is what Houdini uses in memory to reference this node. Okay, so this is the actual programmer name, if you will, right? This is the name that is not going to have spaces or anything. It's going to probably have underscores or something. And generally what I do when I name this is that I give them a pretty name, such as column generator tutorial. I'm going to overwrite my last one. And then see, this automatically fills the name for you here. So all that I like to do is to actually take out my my username, my Windows username, and I just have the same as this, but with underscores, okay? It also creates, asks you where do you want to save the file, and it automatically creates a file name for you. By default, this will be saved into your documents folder in the Houdini 14 or whatever version you're using subfolder, okay? There will be an OTL folder in there, which stands for operator type libraries. And it will be saved as a .hda file. One thing that I want to clarify, the reason why mine is HDA and C is because of having a non-commercial edition of Houdini. HDA, which is the actual name of the file, stands for Houdini Digital Asset, okay? The HDA file can contain multiple digital assets like the one we're about to create, and it's the way how Houdini references knows what nodes does it have available for you, okay? It's the same way for Maya, how you have MLL files that actually are your plugins, okay? So we're gonna just go with this, and we're gonna hit accept. Now you will see that immediately when we do this, a few things actually changed here, okay? Our node looks a little bit different. It, for one, you don't have the multiple inputs here, and you only have one output, okay? It is still a surface operator type, but you will notice that now the name subnet is actually in red. And I'm going to go a little bit over this. But if we look at the top of the parameter window, you will notice that this is now a column generator tutorial node type, which we just created, okay? And sure enough, if we middle mouse on this, it even says it right here. That is a column generator tutorial. So what we just did is we just defined a brand new node inside of Houdini, okay? This is something that in most other programs you have to do using C++, in some of them maybe with C# or Python, okay? In Houdini, this is how simple it is for you to create a brand new node type that you can use for different things, okay? Moving forward, you will notice, however, that we don't have any parameters, okay? And we're gonna go over a little bit on how to create this. But first, I wanted to show this window that opened, okay? This window that opened is the edit operator type properties window. And it's a window that you have available anytime that you wanna change something about your node in Houdini. But it has a few controls which allow you to change how this node actually interacts with the user, what parameters are on the nodes. It allows you to add documentation to the node, and even embed files inside of the node itself, okay? I'm not gonna go over every single tab that we have here, but for this tutorial, I'm just gonna show you just a few important ones, okay? So for example, one thing that we can do here is that we can even embed an icon for the operator. So if you have a nifty little icon of a Greek column, we can go ahead and actually create one and set it as the actual icon instead of the default little subnet bots looking icon, okay? And also pick whether this node is going to have inputs or outputs. In this case, it's a generator, so I don't want any inputs, and I'm okay with just one output right now, okay? But we'll have, during this project, we'll see how we can actually create a few more nodes that actually do take multiple inputs or multiple outputs, okay? The other one that we're going to look at that is very important for today's is the parameter window, okay? So this is where we actually create our parameters for our digital asset, okay? And the way how we go, there is many ways how we can go about doing this, okay? But really the simplest way to create a parameter is to simply go from here. You can see there is many different parameter types that we can create. All that you have to do is to click on one and just click on the little arrow here to drag it into the left side, the right side, okay? And when we do that, we get a new parameter in the list here, okay? by default is called parm, the name, and the label that we're going to see is called label. So if we hit apply here, this is going to save our node definition, and watch, now we have a new parameter called label, okay, which is just a slider that does nothing, okay. If we wanted to call this something different, so like my parm, and call my label my parameter, and hit apply, now all of a sudden our node has changed, and now we have a new parameter called my parameter. If we roll over it, we'll see that the real name, the programmer name of this particular parameter is my parm, okay? We can add all sorts of parameter types. Here is, for example, buttons, which we can also add. We can also add, we can also put all of these parameters in a nice little folder. So if we wanted to put them in a nice little tab, and so on and so forth. There is a lot of different things that we can do here to add parameters. There is also many organizational items such as separators. There is also string parameters that we can use. We can also at any point put reorganize parameters so that they lay adjacent to each other. Can do all sorts of things here. The beautiful thing is that you see me doing all this stuff here, and I really haven't actually written a single line of code, which is awesome. Okay, so, but for now, let's go ahead and actually get started adding some of our parameters from our digital asset, okay? I'm gonna delete these ones for now. I'm gonna hit accept. And then we're gonna show you how to actually edit some of these parameters, okay? So, what we want to do is we want to be able to add parameters which will control certain, I'll move this down here, that will allow us to control certain parts about our column, like for example the number of grooves, the actual radius, etc., like we were looking at in the node that I had already created, okay? Okay, so to do so, we can actually add parameters the way we did here, but the easiest way to do so is to actually go find the node which has these parameters in my subnet, okay? So we can double click on this to dive inside of our network and look for where the parameters that we want to control are. Most of them, if you guys remember, are on the actual tube node. Okay, so we click on the tube node. Here is the parameters that control, for example, the radio scale. Here is the parameters that control the height. Okay, and there is parameters, for example, that control the columns. All right. So let's go ahead and actually start promoting some of those parameters over. Easiest way to do it really is to figure out which parameters you want to keep and simply drag and drop them in your UI. So we want the height. Okay. We want to keep the radio scale. Okay. Maybe we'll rename this one instead of radio scale. We'll rename it to overall radius. Okay. So I'll give it a programmer name and a pretty name. We'll also go ahead and actually promote our rows, and we'll also promote our columns. But instead of calling it columns, I'm going to call it grooves, so it's a little bit more clear to the user. Okay, and that's probably a pretty good start to begin with. Okay, so if we come here, now we can just hit apply. And now you'll notice that immediately these parameters, when I hit apply, turn green. Okay, what's happening is that the moment that you hit apply, Houdini is actually building expressions for you which connect the parameters on the top interface to the parameters on the bottom here. Okay, so if we go up to the top, back to the subnet, to subnet 1, which is actually my column generator, and for clarity I'm going to call it that column gen. Okay, you will notice that now I have parameters on my UI which I didn't have before. Okay, so I can actually use these parameters to control this digital asset without having to dive inside of my asset. So and the cool thing is that if I change these parameters, so say for example I adjust my I will go ahead and adjust my actually groups. When I go inside, you will notice if I set in the tube operator that all of my values here reflect the values coming from the top. Okay, very cool. All right, now I do want to show something. If we actually move this slider here, you will notice that all of a sudden my column pops down, okay, and it looks broken. I can't go beyond 10 on my slider, which is bad. I can come here and type 100, which puts me back there, but imagine a user coming to use your tool and selecting this slider and then seeing this happen. Okay, that's not so good. Okay. One thing that we can do is that we can actually set the ranges of the slider. So if we select the height, we can actually say that we want the height slider to actually go all the way to from probably not 0, but maybe from like 50 to 150. Okay. And the moment that we hit apply, yeah, now it's updated. Okay, so yeah, now the slider here is actually goes from 150 to 50, which is a lot more useful than what we had before. Okay, I believe the overall radius is in the same vein here, so we'll go ahead and actually make that one to go from probably not 0, but to go maybe from 8 to 12. Let me hit it. Ah, there we go. So okay, the radius is now updated. Very cool. So this actually works a lot better now in that sense. Okay. Okay. Now, what else can we add here? We'll notice that one thing that we had control on the other node was the taper. Okay. Now the taper is a very interesting operator, parameter, right? Because if you come inside and you think about it, the taper parameter is a parameter that, you know, comes from the radius. Okay, so the radius of 0.85 on the top equals to a taper. Okay, but if you actually give this to a user, the user are going to put a taper amount. They actually want to go higher to add more taper. So that may not be super clear to somebody if we put a taper parameter that is used the value of a radius. Okay. Now, if you guys remember for a few sessions before, we can actually create expressions which are more than just a reference to a parameter. We can create expressions which have a little bit of logic on them. Okay. So we can simply do this. We can go ahead and create a taper slider. Okay. Oops, I went a little too far there. And we can create one just from the left here. So we can come here and just hit this. And we're going to call this taper. And for that, we're going to set a range that goes from, let me see, something that goes from maybe, okay, 0, which is no taper, to maybe 0.5, which is like 50% taper or so, okay? And that basically maps to a radius multiplier of 1 to 0.5, okay? What it is basically, if you think about it, this is the inverse of a radius. When it's 0, the radius has to be 1. I'm going to hit apply here so we can see it. So here is our taper slider. So what we need to do is to put some logic that says, like, when the slider is 0, the taper in here needs to be 1. When the slider is 0.5, then it's 0.5, and everything in between interpolates, okay? So the way how we do that is that we can simply right click on this, just like we did before, and say copy parameter. Go inside of this, click on the tube node and say paste copied relative references, okay? And now that creates the expression that ties the taper from the top to this, the same way how we have done before, okay? But what we want to do here is that we want to do the inverse of the taper, because the user is, when the user puts 0 taper, we want the radius to be 1, which is 1 times 10.177 in this case, okay? And there we go. Now if the user comes to the top here, and they start and they play with the taper, now everything works as expected. Wonderful. Very cool. All right, so from this point, we actually have all the stuff that we wanted to add on the last, from the last node. Okay. So I'm gonna hit accept here, which will actually make this window go away. But now, one thing that I would like to do though is that I want it by default to actually have a little bit of taper. So then that way the user doesn't always drop a new node. Say column generator tutorial, and gets a column that is always placed at 0 with 0 taper. Okay, it would be cool if by default it had just a little bit of taper. Okay, So we can simply do that in the type properties window as well. Now you notice that I close the window. So to get back to that window, what we want to do is to right click on column gen and go to type properties. Okay, this opens the type properties window again, the way we had it before. And we want to click on the taper node, and we're going to go to the channels tab up here. Okay, the channels tab will allow us to set this to a default value. Like in this case, I want it to be 0.15, which is just a little taper. Okay, we hit apply. Now you will notice that this thing automatically popped to 1.5 because in essence it was just the default value. Okay, we had never modified the slider. So then we can see here that now we can go in between 0 and 0.5 as expected. Okay, very cool. Now, although this kind of like covers everything that we promoted from before, we can still promote. I can still show you how to promote other things. For example, what if we wanted to, for example, promote the location of where the grooves start and where the grooves end? And you guys remember we could control that via the project sub. So the project sub had some operations which had controls for those things. Okay, so if we dive inside here, we'll go look for the project sub. We'll notice that we have the U range and the V range that we can control to adjust that. Okay, and one thing I like to do before I promote anything, I like to actually clean up my parameters a little bit so that they have at least a number that, you know, kind of makes a little bit of sense. Like this is a little bit of a low number, you know. And perhaps what we can do is to actually do it, set it to something like 0.005. Okay, and then this one to maybe 295 or so. Okay, that should actually even make them a little bit more even, perhaps. Well, maybe not. Maybe 995 is what I want. There we go. So that should make them a little bit more even. Okay. Okay. So here we can actually go ahead and promote these parameters to give the user controls on the top and the bottom. Okay. So we can actually now, instead of actually making instead of actually having a slider here, we can also promote this actual flow to parameter that we have here. When we drag it here, you'll notice that we get actually two parameters here. Okay, as a size 2. When we hit apply, they are both actually promoted at the same time. Okay. The range is probably not the best name for it. Most people are not gonna get what that is. Maybe we can call it groove start end. I can say groove start end, and then hit apply. Okay, so those are a little bit more of a better name. And now if we go to the top, you notice that now we can simply use the slider to control the beginning and the end of the grooves. Okay, so that's pretty cool, you know, thing to promote. I think it's actually nice to be able to do that. Okay, we probably should make it so that the user cannot go beyond 1 or beyond 0 or below 0. So basically we can come here and go to range and set it to lock down at 0 between 0 and 1. These little locks that you have here makes it so that the number actually doesn't actually lock out. The number will never go beyond that value, even if you're sliding. Okay, so we apply, and now this should not actually go beyond that value. And let's try it out. Okay, there we go. So now it actually locks down at that, and it will never go below it, even if you keep sliding. Very cool. At any point, remember, you can revert these values to default by just right clicking, and it will remember the defaults that we actually created from the bottom. Okay, so as this starts actually growing, you know, we probably want to organize our parameter interface a little bit. So we can put just a separator right here to separate the beginning and the groove section from the rest section. You know, I like to sometimes put also one here on the top, and then hit apply, and then start organizing things a little bit so that we can actually look at things a little bit more organized. Okay, we can even, if we want to, have a little bit of fun here and put these two guys, let's remove the separators for a second, and then we'll put the grooves into a folder. So put parameters in your folder. which I'm gonna call this folder groove control, groove controls, groove controls. Okay, and we're going to actually put it into a collapsible block. Okay, so you can see here we have multiple folder types that we can create. We'll get into the multi-parms in more advanced options, but you have, for example, radio buttons if you want tabs that you can actually switch things, you know. Can do the tabs like you saw. There is also a simple block that you can use and also a collapsible block, which in this case I think is very useful for what we want to do. Okay, so here is our groove controls. So if we click on this, we can see them here, but we don't have to look at them all the time. So if we want to keep the interface nice and clean and simple, okay? Yeah, we can still have our separators there, why not? So in that way we keep it even a little bit simpler. There we go. Very cool. So let's see what some other things that we can do. Now, one thing that I will note is that it is not too late at this point even to continue to modify the digital asset if we want to, okay? So say, for example, we wanted to control the color of a column. We can actually dive in here and come to the very bottom and add a color operator, okay? Which actually allows us to color the column. And we can even see it here. Oops. We can actually choose a particular color for the column. We'll default it like a nice little gray or something, maybe like a little light gray. Can switch here in between different types, but we can, after I add that, I can simply come here and drag and drop my little color picker here and hit apply. And now on the very top level I have a color control for my actual column. Okay, very cool. Now I'll show you another thing that we can do here. Say, for example, a user wanted to not have the top and bottom pieces, okay? And they just wanted the actual column by itself. Maybe because they needed the column to be part of a separate section of a building which had a different modeled ornament or something like that, okay? It's very possible, depending on what people productions are, they may need some options to actually turn off the top and bottom caps, okay? You can simply do that by using a switch underneath the network, okay? So if we come here, we can simply turn off the caps by putting a switch for them, okay? So we can do, let's actually first do this. We'll go ahead and actually merge them together. Okay, and instead of actually connecting them like this into the actual merge at the very bottom, and I'll show this a little bit. So this is my two caps right here. Here, I'll just show the visibility here so that we can see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just grab the merge together and just bring the merge caps into the merged final merge column. So I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to disconnect. Okay, and then on the left here I have the full column coming. So I'm going to grab this and just merge it here, okay? And you'll see what I'm doing that, okay? The reason why I'm doing that is because here what I want to do is to add a switch, okay? So what I like to do is to put a switch node. Actually, let's start first with a null node. So a null node is, like I mentioned before, has absolutely nothing. If I make it visible, it's really what the name implies. It's null. It has no geometry with it, okay? And where that is useful is if I put a switch here and I feed the null here, and actually I want them backwards, so I'm going to do Shift R, so that what I want is the null to be the first and the merge to be the next one. So now on this particular switch, and I'll show the interface again here in the switch parameter. So what I can do with the switch is then I can switch between having columns caps or not having column caps. Very cool. So because now I can actually control that here, as you can imagine, I can control that on the top. So I'll default it to 1, which means that they're on, and I'll add that to my digital asset. Okay, so now I have a thing here, and I'm gonna call it column caps. Column caps. caps. Oh, it should work. Enable column caps. There we go. And we're gonna hit apply, which now controls the actual input here. If we go to the top now, you will notice that now, oops, I forgot to also put my blue node, or the node that has a little blue flag, into the out. There we go. Now if we go to the very top, you will notice that we have now a slider here which now allows us to turn the caps on and off. Okay, well, that's cool, but there is one problem with doing so, which is a slider is really not the best way to really get people to actually know how to, pick those things, okay? So the best way to do that is to actually use a toggle, okay? Now at any point, we can pick any parameter, like in this case is the enable column caps parameter that we have here, and simply switch it from being like, say, an integer slider to being a toggle. So when we do that, and we hit up, and you saw me doing that in this little menu right here, right below the parameter name. So we do that and we hit apply. Now watch. Now we actually have a little toggle which enables and disables column caps. We could even give the user a little bit more information if we use, say, for example, a drop-down menu which say on and off or something like that, okay? And, for this a toggle will probably be sufficient, but just because I want to show how to create drop-down menus in Houdini, I'm going to actually show you how to do so. Okay, so we're going to change it to that. Okay, so we're going to switch it back to an integer, so that it's again back to being the slider that it was, okay? And hit apply. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to menu and I'm going to say use menu, okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to, for the menu, is the first thing that the menu wants to do is it wants to know what items I want to add to this, okay? So for the menu items, first want to add an item that is going to be the value of 0, and that's going to be equals to off, okay? And then I'm going to add another menu item which is going to be a value of 1, and the label for that is going to be on. Now the thing to remember again, this is the value that you're actually passing to the switch operator below, the value on the slider, for example. This is the pretty label that the user is going to see when they see your drop-down menu, okay? So the moment that we hit apply, now our actual slider turns into a drop-down menu that we can simply use to pop our columns on and off. Very nice. Very cool. For this part, now at any point I can turn off the menu if I want to, and go back to the slider if I wanted to do that. We'll go ahead and actually just keep the menu just for fun. Okay. Very cool. Okay. So when we're done with this, we can go ahead and hit accept again, and that just makes sure that all of our changes are saved. Now I want to make a very clear distinction about what's going on here when we're hitting accept. Okay. If we go to type properties, every time that we hit apply, or every time that we hit accept, and you see the node change here, what's happening is that this file, the one that is getting saved on my document in my OTLs folder, which is .hdanc, is getting saved and written over. Okay, we're basically saving our plugin file every time that we hit apply and accept. Okay, and that's cool. So, but say for example, I do a network modification to do something, and I want to be able to see it, and I want to be able to say without having the menu open. Okay, we can do that also by right-clicking on the node and saying save operator type. Okay, hitting save operator type is equivalent of actually saving your node without having to have that window open. So if you come, for example, here and add a little label for somebody for maybe another, digital asset developer to come here and say this does something. You just wanted to save that change. And come back here and right click on this and say save operator type. Okay, and that saves it with a new label in without having to open that. Okay. Very cool. Another important one to remember is that if when we're done editing and we want this node to actually not be open and we not want to be able to edit these things, we can also say match current definition. Okay, what that does is that overrides this node with the definition that is on disk. Okay, so just to demonstrate that again, so if so say for example I want to edit this node again. Okay, after I actually locked it down, I can right click, and you will notice that it's locked down because the text is blue. And also if we go inside, you will notice that the whole network is grayed out, and I cannot really, I can move nodes around, but I really can say, for example, change the visibilities or not. I'm basically locked down from doing any changes to the parameters or anything like that. Okay, see, everything is grayed out here. But say, for example, I wanted indeed to actually go back to doing changes. I can right click on this and say allow editing of contents. Okay, and then notice that the text turned red, and I'm gonna try that again, just show that again, just because I went a little too fast there. So I'm gonna match current definition. All of these are right by the button. Okay, so we're gonna match definition again, which makes it blue. I'm gonna right click on it and say around the very bottom, allow editing of contents again. Okay, and that makes it red. So if we go inside, now everything, notice that it's not grayed out anymore, and we can go back and doing changes if we want to, like changing the node that is visible. Okay, say for example I'm doing this, I do some changes, I add another node, for example that does blah, and then I add a node that totally destroys what my column is, and I'm just not happy with the results anymore. I can simply go back over here and say, you know what, I don't want to undo those changes. I just want to use whatever I have on disk on my HDA file. All I have to do is right click, and instead of saying save, say match current definition. And that's going to force your node to use the definition that is on disk again. And you will notice that your changes are gone. Okay, so use your responsibility to make sure that you don't lose something that you indeed want to keep, but that know that this is also something that you can do. Okay, another thing that is very neat about saving your definition is that, as I showed before, I can go ahead and create another column generator, right? Let me see. So now I have two of them, and I'm going to move this one to the left a little bit so that we can see what we're actually doing here. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move this one over here. Then we'll keep this one over here. Now, one thing that is kind of neat about this way how definitions work here is that if we actually come here and say allow editing, say we actually come here and do something here. I'll merge these two nodes so you can see them together. Say I come here and I actually do a change to my definition, but the other node has not taken it. Okay, so you will notice, for example, that our origin is right around here and our column sits in the middle. Well, I want to make it so that the column is automatically sitting, the bottom is sitting right at the origin. Okay, so to do that, we can do that with a transform node. So we do transform. Actually, I'm gonna put the transform before the normal, so then that way our normal node the normals are not affected by the transformation in that sense. And I'm going to set it to actually move up. Now we can actually, of course, move it up this way, okay, but then obviously it's not going to work when the user changes the height. Okay, so what we're going to do is use a simple variable here to actually move it up to a certain amount. So we can do to say that I want basically to go the size of my column, so it will be y size or size y, my variable. You can see if we start typing variables that we actually get a little auto-completion here, divided by 2. Okay, and that moves it up to that point. Okay, and if I go up now, you will notice that even as I modify the height, the column always grows and shrinks from the origin. Okay, so that's very cool, but you notice that my column over here didn't pick up that change. And if we go inside of it, you will notice that it's missing that change altogether. Okay, That's because when this node is read, the definition hasn't even made it to the actual HTA file. It's still a definition, that is embedded in the heap file, not in the actual HTA file. So just to make that clear, when the node is read, your changes are local to here. They're not actually stored in the heap file. The moment that I hit save operator type, you will notice that this column immediately pops into place. And now this column also behaves like you would expect. See that? Very cool. Okay. And then when I'm done with the changes here, like I said, now we can do match current definition. And now both of these columns are locked with their, proper settings. Very cool. All right, so this should do it for today. On the next session, we will look into a little bit of creation strategies for digital assets, as well as some tricks for actually debugging your digital asset. But thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.